This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all my colleagues who are joining us right now from around the world. It's a privilege that we are hosting the first webinar for IC3 2020. I would request all of you to mute your microphones because there is a lot of disturbance that we are getting. So I will be really grateful if you can close your microphones at the moment. We have a very fabulous topic to discuss today and an excellent lineup of presenters for you. Over the next 60 minutes or so, we will be talking about criteria for undergraduate programs in 4 fabulous destinations. We will be talking about admission processes in the United States, Europe, Australia, and India. The session has been divided in 60-minute session. There is a lot to cover, so we have decided that each speaker will be given 10 minutes each to talk his or her own expertise area. For 10 minutes, we will have a Q&A round at the end, be somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes. I will request all of you to put your questions in the chat box, and we will be taking them up at the last. Let me introduce you all to our panel today, my co-presenters. We have a panel of 4. We have Ms. Vicki West from Ohio University, US, Ms. Petra Orent from Franklin University, Switzerland, and we have Mr. Sagar from University of Queensland, who will be talking about Australia. And I, at the end, will be talking about an emerging destination which has been there since years, but not a major destination as of now, India. So the lineup for today, and we are excited to have all of you joining us. We have a very long presentation to go through and a limited time. So without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Vicki to take the webinar forward and introduce us with her insights into the US admission practices for undergraduate programs. Vicki?
Great, thanks so much, Ankur. Go ahead and move on to the next slide real quickly. We're going to get things kicked off with a spotlight on the United States. All right, next slide. So, as you probably know, the US is the top destination for international students to study abroad. So it is important for us to have an understanding of what they need to know when it comes to applying to US institutions. I'm going to begin by creating a little bit of context for everybody. The great news is that we have a really amazing wealth of choices when it comes to institutions. I mean, we're talking about nearly 5,000 accredited US institutions. But with that, it also means that we're talking about what can be a very complex system as well. First, we have several different types of institutions, each of which can be categorized as having a slightly different focus. From community colleges, where students will begin their first 2 years of study and then transfer to a 4-year institution to complete their degrees, to liberal arts colleges, to research-focused universities offering both undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. And then within each of those categories, we still have a great deal of variability. Most importantly, for the purposes of this webinar, variability when it comes to admission requirements. Next slide. Get the next slide, Ankur.
Yeah, Vicki, I'm doing it. I think we are.
Oh, we're stuck?
Yeah, I am. We are a bit stuck. The slide is not moving next. Yeah, now it says done. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So basically, even the US Department of Education points out the fact that we're dealing with a really decentralized system in which each university essentially operates autonomously from each other. So this means that each can have a different set of admission criteria and different requirements to apply. That's kind of why I've dubbed the US as the land of it depends, because there's no easy answer to the question, what do I have to do when I apply to a US university? The answer is always going to be, it depends. Where do you want to apply? Next slide. So fortunately, we've got a couple of basic components that pretty much every institution is looking for. Slides are getting caught out there, but I'm going to keep on going. There we go. The first is obviously the application, but students may have choices about what application to use when it comes to U.S. institutions. These could be applications like the Common App or the Coalition App, which students can use to apply to more than one institution, or an application that is specific to a single school. Then we will all want to see how well the student performed in high school. But even while all universities will want an applicant's high school grades, many of us have different stipulations about how we will accept those transcripts, how many years are required, original versus attested copies, scanned or hard copies, etc. So already we're starting to see some of the complexities that I was talking about earlier. Next slide. And then we come to all the different variables that schools may or may not want to see as part of their application process in the US. Excuse me. Most institutions will shy away from giving a strict minimum GPA requirement, often citing an average GPA for a successful applicant. There are a variety of deadline options, which can be different from institution to institution. And then exam requirements is always a really interesting one. There's been a misperception among many international students that the SAT or the ACT exam is required to come and study in the United States. In actuality, there are plenty of high-quality institutions that don't require either exam for admission. In fact, there's a growing trend of more and more institutions that are becoming test optional. But do have your students keep in mind that even at some schools that don't require the SAT or the ACT for admission purposes, they may request exam results for scholarship consideration. Other commonly required or recommended application components would be some sort of writing sample or essay or statement of purpose, letters or letters of recommendation, and a listing of the student's activities. And all of this is meant to give us an idea of how well-rounded the student is. Some more selective universities may require an interview process, and visual arts and performing arts programs may want a portfolio or an audition as part of the application process. But just to make things a little bit more interesting, sometimes these requirements will differ from program to program within the same institution. So there may be additional requirements if a student wishes to be eligible for scholarship consideration. So all of these are things that you need to keep in mind. Next slide. Basically, it's all going to come down to fit. You've got some basic application components now, but what are the schools really looking for? So one thing that you'll hear US university reps say over and over again is that it's all about finding the right fit institution for the student. And this is really a two-way street. I think we can pretty easily generalize that we want students who will be happy, healthy, and successful and engaged members of our university communities. We all strive for diverse student bodies, so we want students representing a variety of different backgrounds. But then how do we measure those things when it comes to the application process? Next slide. This brings us to the concept of the holistic application review process, which is a method used by a lot of US institutions. This is where a university takes multiple factors, not just academics, into consideration when reviewing a student's application. With holistic review, there's no set formula for determining admissibility, so no automatic admit or deny requirements or criteria. All the materials that the applicant sends in are factored into the decision process. By taking things like extracurricular activities, talents, and family backgrounds into consideration, we get a picture of the student in context as more than a set of grades and scores. And this process allows the university to view the student's fit on their campus and their potential for success there. Now, does this mean that a student needs to be involved in absolutely everything to be a viable candidate for admission? No, of course not. Generally speaking, we want to see a student delve into a few select activities that they're passionate about and that they can take leadership roles in, more so than doing a little bit of absolutely everything, which is why I've said that depth is generally better than breadth when it comes to activities. The holistic review process serves universities as a way to find students that are a good fit for them, but it does add a little bit more mystery in the process when you, as an advisor or counselor, are trying to determine if a student is going to be admitted to a U.S. university. Next slide. So with all of these complexities and challenges that I've now presented you with, is it really still worthwhile to encourage your students to apply to study in the U.S.? And the answer is absolutely yes, you should. There is a reason that over half of the top 20 QS world-ranked universities are in the United States, and why the U.S. is still the #1 study abroad destination. The sheer quantity of quality that we have in the U.S. is absolutely amazing. And we have so much to offer that there's generally going to be something to fit most every student. Then there's a great deal of freedom and flexibility in how our system is structured in the United States. First of all, it's perfectly acceptable for students to enter university not knowing what they're going to study. We don't expect students at 18 or 17 years of age to know exactly what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So we give them the flexibility and the support they need to make informed choices over the course of their academic career. They also have the flexibility to be able to change their minds about what they're studying without having to start over from the beginning. The U.S. also takes an interdisciplinary approach to education, allowing students the opportunity to explore intersections of different fields of study, which are becoming more and more critical as new careers continue to emerge and develop. Allowing students to study multiple subjects also gives them the freedom to delve both into their career interests and their passions. The U.S. classroom environment is dynamic and participatory, and it really pushes students to become critical thinkers, to utilize soft skills like communication, leadership, and problem solving. And this kind of atmosphere encourages entrepreneurial and creative outcomes. So these are all great reasons for students to really continue studying in the United States. Next slide. So yes, we're definitely worth it, but how can you best advise your students when there are so many different moving pieces when it comes to the admission process in the United States? First of all, I would encourage you to emphasize the need to start early, both in researching students' options as well as getting them started in the application process, test preparation, and etc. You can work with your students on self-reflective exercises that will get them thinking about what will constitute the best fit for them when it comes to their needs and their goals and aspirations. Of course, organization is going to be key. Have your students develop and maintain a spreadsheet that indicates the variables from all the different institutions they want to apply to. And then, based on what you know about the student, help them sort their options so that they have institutions represented that range from aspirational to good fit institutions to ones to which they will be likely admitted. If you need help, there are many places to go for support, this being one of them. IC3 and other organizations like Education USA and International ACAC are going to put you in direct contact with university representatives and other experienced colleagues as well, who can help you to navigate this process when it gets to be a little bit challenging. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the section on the US. Just a few last words. Yes, it can be complex and sometimes a little confusing, but when it comes to the undergraduate application and admission process, the outcomes and the benefits will make it well worth the effort. So that's it from the United States, and we'll be moving on now to India, I believe. Australia, rather. Sorry, Sagar.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki. Thank you so much for an interesting session. I would like to invite, India has some time to come. I'd like to invite Sagar to talk about Australia as a higher education destination. Sagar, if you can take it forward from here.
Thanks. Thank you, Ankur. Thank you, Vicki, for the insightful presentation. So I am Sagar Bahadur. I'm the principal advisor for the University of Queensland, based out of India. And it's a privilege to be on this platform to talk about the Australian higher education, focusing on the UG segment. I will still like to keep, a majority of my presentation more towards, context on how the Australian higher education is segmented. and will focus majorly on the group of 8 universities to move forward. So generally, when I generally speak to students, I generally start off with a question that when they think of Australia, what is it that comes to their mind? And to a majority of them, I then have to change their perception from something what they have in mind, which is, Ankur, we'll go to the next. So yes, so when they think of Australia, this is something that we have to change, and we are continuously changing. That this certainly doesn't happen in Australia, and we generally got this feedback that when people think of Australia, they see wide open spaces, they see outback, bushes, kangaroos, koalas, clean air, and water. But then I feel Australia has much more to offer than the usual expectations. It surely is, a holiday destination for millions of tourists, but then it has huge potential for prospective students to, for in terms of challenging them academically, culturally, and socially. Many international students are now choosing Australia because of its friendly and laid-back nature, excellent education system, and high standards of living. There are few, sites which connect you directly to Australia and teleports you directly what Australia is all about, and some of them are. So this particular image directly takes you to the beautiful city of Sydney, and is one such example, when students can think of Australia. The other being the Great Barrier Reef that directly takes you to Australia, and then we have the Gold Coast. When students generally think of Australia, and there are some unusual sites which students think of. Should think of. So this is the Wi-Fi, which not many people would know was invented in Australia, and so was Google Maps, which should be our next slide. So what basically we are trying to drive from this is that it's not just a fancy tourist attraction. It's not just friendly people or the standard of living, but we're talking about some of the finest universities, some of the finest research institutions in the world that are trying to make breakthroughs, which advances our world towards new technology. We're talking about Wi-Fi, Google Maps, the black box flight recorder, bionic ear, the refrigerator, plastic banknotes, cervical cancer vaccine, and the MRI technology. Both these were developed, at the University of Queensland, of course. We're talking about Australia as a center of innovation research. It has the highest rate of patent applications in the field of biotechnology, in the field of renewable energy. And interestingly, 3% of the world's research output comes from Australia, and Australia only accounts for only 0.5% of the world population. So this is basically an emphasis that we are trying to put in onto students as well as schools, that this can be a point for students to pick on. That they're about to look at institutions in Australia which dwell a lot on research, and there is a lot of value joining these institutions. Ankur, next slide. So we're talking about a very big country. We're talking about a country, the size of almost the size of US. This is just to give you a context that, there are big countries like South Africa, Thailand, Germany, France, Italy, UK, New Zealand, Japan, so many countries that can fit in. So it's really a huge country and not just a few cities that, generally we talk about in India. And just to give you a context that we're talking about 6 states and 2 national territories in Australia, I've just tried to highlight some of the major cities, where you can find good, research institutions. So we're talking about Brisbane in Queensland, Sydney in New South Wales, Melbourne in Victoria, Adelaide in South Australia, Perth and Darwin, to be there. So just to give you an overview of how the education sector looks like. So we're talking about Australia being the 3rd most popular international student destination in the world. In terms of ratio, we're talking about the highest number of international students as compared to their local population in the world. 7 of the best student cities in the world are in Australia. We're talking about 43 universities, 40 of them are public, 2 international, and 1 private. However, the flagship universities in Australia are called the Group of 8 universities. It's something like the Ivy Leagues in the US or the Russell Group in the UK. It's a coalition of world-leading research-intensive universities of Australia, which are the largest and the oldest, and are consistently ranked the highest, in Australia. Interesting fact is that 5 of the world's top 50 universities are the Group of 8, universities. And the government is also quite proactive. They've invested over $300 million for international students in the form of scholarships. Again, just keeping the map in mind in the previous, the last to last slide, this just gives you a good outlook of where these Group of 8 universities are. So we're talking about 8 of them, of course, the Australian National University, ANU, based out of Canberra, the University of Queensland, based out of Brisbane, the University of Western Australia in Perth, the University of Melbourne, the University of Adelaide, University of Sydney, Monash University in Melbourne, and University of New South Wales also in Sydney. This is just to give you again a context of why I'm focusing more on the Group of 8. So we're talking about these are the QS rankings for the last 3 years, just to show consistency. And you will notice that the top 8 universities are the Group of 8 universities. You'll see Australian ANU featuring in the top 30 in the world. We have Melbourne in the top 40 and Sydney, New South Wales, and Queensland in the top 50 in the world. We're talking about 10,000 universities being judged, out of which this is, a great number to have for these universities. And then you'll have the usual universities which are operating in India, like Curtin, Macquarie, RMIT, Deakin, also featuring in the QS list here. So this was just to give an idea of how the Group of 8 are ranked in the world and how consistent are they with their rankings. The Group of 8 universities and even the other ones, they cover all the broad study areas. So we're talking about in the UG segment, agriculture, environment, architecture, planning, arts, humanities, social sciences, business economics, education, engineering, computing, law, medicine, science, and mathematics. So mostly all these disciplines are covered in all the Group of 8 universities. They also provide niche programs, something like, as emerging as a cybersecurity, data sciences, artificial intelligence, and public health and environmental sciences. I've just taken liberty to, give you just in terms of subject rankings in the world, how the Group of 8 universities feature. I've taken the liberty to take University of Queensland because this data was there ready with me. So we're taking, in terms, if you see the first column, in terms of the QS rankings, we're talking about all these programs ranked in the top 30 in the world. So sports sciences, mineral and mining, education, nursing, psychology, sociology. And in the US News Best Global University rankings, we're talking in the top 50. So this is just to give you an idea that even in terms not just of the university rankings, but subject rankings in the world, we're talking about very high quality of program as well as research when it comes to the Group of 8 universities. Now focusing on the undergraduate segment, we're talking mostly about 2 intakes for the UG. We're talking about July and February. There are some universities who have started a September intake too. The degree length is generally for bachelor's of 3 years, and then there's an option of a 4th year for honors. We're talking about possibilities of students getting into a double degree or concurrent programs, where students can undertake units from different degrees at a time and can earn 2 degrees, while at their tenure. Each of the universities have scholarship available for international students. They are very generous for Indian students, and for both intakes, students have to apply and seek scholarships. Just to give you an idea of how it works, so they have 10 different levels in their framework. We're talking about level 1 to 4. which is the certificate level. We're talking about level 5 to be a diploma. Level 6 becomes an associate degree. Level 7 is a bachelor's degree. Level 8 becomes an honors degree in bachelor's. And level 9 and 10 becomes a postgraduate degree. So this is just a progression of how this works in Australia. In terms of the broad requirements, we're talking about academic requirements. For undergraduate, most of the group of 8 would accept CBSE schools, the ICSE schools, international board schools, and the other state boards of India. There are certain programs where there are subject prerequisites for some quota programs that have to be fulfilled. It depends from university to university and the particular program that you choose in. There is a strong requirement for English language proficiency. So we're talking about IELTS, TOEFL, Pearson. There is a small window of a medium of instruction, which not many group of 8 universities will allow. A medium of instruction is basically an evidence that the student has studied English in the past qualification, which would be the school. There's some universities which we may accept, but the group of 8 generally avoid, accepting the MOIs. Just as a caution, we generally recommend students to go through a certified English test so that it helps their visa application to be much stronger. There's something called a GTE when it comes to Australia. GTE stands for a genuine temporary entrant, which is generally to test the intent of students coming into Australia, that, are they really coming in for studies, and do they really know what they're trying to get into? So these checks are done at the university. These are also done by external agencies back in India, or the agents that they apply to. And the same way, the agents and external agencies can help students file visas. There are alternate routes also apart from academic. If a student misses the academic requirement or falls short, which can be the foundation year in most of the universities, or some kind of online support like we have UniLearn, which is basically offers self-paced distance education module for students to cover, to meet the eligibility requirements. How to apply becomes, an important point. So there are 3 different routes where you can apply to Australian universities. One is you can directly apply to the university through its website. It's a very interactive website. It's very user-friendly. You can put in the application with the documents, and the university then connects you back to its representatives in India or even in Australia to help you, guide the whole process. Most of the universities have agent partners in India in different cities, and you can always walk up to any of the authorized agents, which you can find on the website of the universities, and take help in the process. And then some of the universities work directly with schools, which is quite an interesting model where they engage with schools. They try to develop capacity, try to educate students and counselors of what are the opportunities, and then directly work with the school to help students apply to these universities. So these are how, the ways you can apply. I generally want to keep it more towards, a context of what a group of 8 means, because that is, I think, a mandate for all of us to start, educating the audience in India of the kind of quality that Australia can offer in terms of education. And that's, that's the basic purpose of my presentation. I would like to wrap it up there. Thanks, Ankur.
Thank you, Sagar. Thank you so much for a really informative presentation on Australia. I would like to invite Petra now to guide us through the admission process at European universities. Petra, if you're there.
Yes, I am, and I'm very excited to kind of take on the next part. Obviously, my wonderful colleagues are representing singular countries. I have the pleasure of representing an entire continent. And of course, here to help answer any specific afterwards, so do keep that in mind. Obviously, I always kind of point out when it does come to Europe, there's kind of 2 different ways to kind of put it into context. There's Europe, as we talk about it as an entire continent, which certainly represents about 51 independent nations, with a population of around 750 million inhabitants, with the largest countries kind of being Germany, the UK, and France. But of course, there's the secondary point, which is very much referred to for the European Union consistency, which is of 28 countries, and those, of course, being part of the Schengen Agreement, which 22 out of the 28 are, along with 4 others. And this is very important when we put into context of Europe and Europe being a destination, because, of course, having free movement among so many different countries certainly is a benefit to many students that are exploring opportunities that we do have across all of these countries, and for them to really be able to explore the entire continent in terms of history, that certainly dictates a lot of the points in their education. At the moment, it does seem that we have about 3,300 higher ed institutions across the European Union, and just over 4,000 when you are looking at Europe as a whole. Since about 1999, most of the European countries, it started with about 29, did sign on to what we refer to as our Bologna process. So many of the countries very much standing up for education and having kind of a continuity in terms of recognizing institutions that are out there to educate students, to very much focus on quality of education, and to move everything forward in terms of what universities are currently doing. And there is a new initiative that by 2025, the European educational area will be moving forward with a lot more things that are happening there. On the next slide, I was just looking at some general kind of statistics. So from the European Union, they're estimating that in 2016, we had about 1.6 million students coming from abroad to Europe. I'm sure that has been increasing, as you know, with a lot of these bureaucratic processes. We get this information a little bit later. And they do a breakdown in terms of countries and what the students are coming in to study. And at the moment, it seems that a lot of the areas in social sciences, journalism, things in business, in administration, and in law does take actually the top spot. That's usually followed by things in engineering, manufacturing, as well as the arts and humanities. So you are getting a lot of different kind of subject areas represented in terms of university level study for students. On the next slide, I always very much kind of point out that in Europe, based on the guidelines across many of the countries, we do pretty much kind of have a bit of a difference when we are looking at the different stages of education. So bachelor's programs can be 3 years for the most part. There are some structured into a 4-year program. Master's degree is the same, can be a 1-year program or a 2-year program. And then of course you have your doctorate or PhD programs, which could also range from 3 to 4 years. They generally kind of do follow a credit system, which is referred to as the IC3 system. So you do see the different kind of guidelines that go along with that. And similar to all the other countries, you certainly have different levels of education. So you have full universities that are on offer, universities that are more technically focused. You have the universities of applied sciences. There are numerous conservatories for students looking into the arts and music. You have plenty of private institutions these days, as well as business schools or specialty kind of areas. And there is more of a presence in terms of kind of preparation or foundation programs. So it is something that was very prevalent, you know, with the UK, but you do seem to find definitely many different options across the continent as well. So now just to put it in context onto the next slide is, of course, coming from Switzerland, just to kind of give you a little bit of background in terms of how things work in the country that I live in, is that we generally have 10 national public universities and then 2 specialty research institutions, which are the ones that are certainly entering those top rankings across the world. So you do have ETH in Zurich, Switzerland, and you have EPFL, which is located in Lausanne. We also have about 19 universities of applied sciences. As many of you know, Switzerland is certainly known for hospitality management. So we have plenty of schools that are recognized in this area. And then there are some private American liberal arts colleges, such as Franklin University, Switzerland. So it is very nice to see that one country can certainly offer quite a bit to the students. One of the key things that we certainly kind of talk about as you're looking at many of these kind of countries is that there is definitely a promotion to education. And I think what Europe has really tried to kind of hone in on is that you don't necessarily have to go to an English-speaking country in order to study in English, and that there are a tremendous amount of benefits of kind of going to countries that do speak other languages, that have a cultural aspect to the education to bring to that. And again, just to create a lot lot more of these global citizens that we're looking at. So obviously Germany has been many times in the news, not just for being free education, but also being a wonderful staple for what's being offered to students. You're seeing a very, very strong strength, obviously, out of Holland, the Netherlands, really representing international educations to students coming from across the world. I think we're seeing a lot more of a presence out of Eastern Europe, countries such as Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, especially putting themselves on the map for wonderful programs in medicine, in dentistry, in different health sciences, and granting students a lot of those kind of opportunities. And then, of course, you have great countries such as Spain and Italy that certainly kind of bring on the cultural aspects to everything that we hear about Europe. In terms of admissions, know that there are a lot of kind of different groups that are great assets to you. Obviously, out of the UK, UCAS, British Council have definitely been present in this international format. You are seeing also groups of universities come together. So there is the European University Consortium, which is there to promote kind of public institutions throughout Europe that are offering amazing international English language programs for students. Areas such as the American universities abroad, allowing students to know that there are American-style universities that they can find on the European continent. And of course, things like Study in Holland, Study in Germany, the DAAD, or just kind of the study.eu for great resources as students are exploring that. In terms of admissions processes, this is, of course, very, very hard to put it all together, but you do generally start with an application. For majority of the countries and universities, you will be applying directly to the university itself. Obviously, in places like the UK, you have access to UCAS, for the Netherlands, StudiLink, or obviously in Germany, you also have options to use the Uni Assist. So you do have things in there, but exactly, I'm going to borrow from Vicki. It all depends in terms of which country and which system that you're looking at. For a lot of the European public universities, the main issue is going to be, do you have a recognized high school degree in order to enter the university? In Switzerland, we're very lucky. Our public system websites are very clear and very concise. You beautifully can kind of click on the fact that you're coming from outside of the Swiss system. You can select the country that you're coming from. They'll showcase the different kind of diploma programs and then specifically spit out, this is what you're going to need. Many of them do tend to be very strongly subject specific because you are applying to a university specific subject when you are entering the university. So they will be looking for things in language and sciences and the math. And in many times it is a black or white situation. You either meet the requirements or you don't. That's just kind of how it's going to be. So there is certain focus on that. The same way, sometimes not all programs are created equal in terms of the European standards. So even international baccalaureate programs, advanced levels and things like that will be looked at differently by each individual country. For the general part, you don't necessarily tend to see a need for recommendation letters. So it is more academically focused. And there are so many universities where students will be either invited to set entry examinations or that will be one of the components of the process. So based on the particular subjects, they will sit an exam and they will generally have to come to the country and to the university to take that on. Last part that I always mention is certainly language proficiency. I know many times it is a question that if you are coming to Europe and will be studying in a particular language, it is important to kind of know that sometimes they do downplay how much of a level you need. I think many of us definitely see like a B2 level. I think the reality for most countries is a C1, C2 in order for you to kind of be proficient in those areas to be there. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on obviously the benefits of coming to Europe. So the European Union is kind of showing new information in terms of kind of where students are being successful in terms of after graduation and getting jobs. So different areas in Germany, in the Czech Republic, right, in the Netherlands. So it's really important to have students kind of explore these different countries that maybe weren't completely on their radar. And of course, on the next slide, there's always kind of a conversations with parents as well as students in terms of what will happen after they graduate. So for example, the UK has brought back kind of their 2-year post-study visa, which is a great opportunity for students obviously to stay on, to look for job opportunities, to continue with their education. The Netherlands has always been wonderful in terms of this orientation year, where students are granted 1 year, but it can be used within the 3-year period, so giving them a lot more flexibility. Switzerland has kind of increased from 6 months up to a year. earlier in terms of granting students the opportunity to remain in the country. The same goes for a lot of the others. And it's always important to know there are fine prints to everything, and there's many things that are changing, but I think for many European countries, there is a recognition that if we're bringing students into our countries, it is about the fact that we would like to retain them and kind of train them in the next stage of their careers. So I feel like that was a lot in terms of seeing the benefits on the next slide. So of course, great career options, great cultural options, great way for students to learn other languages and just experience Europe. So definitely many, many, many good points on why students should consider the European continent as their study destination.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you so much for your informative presentation. I will now move on to, the underdog in these 4 countries that we are talking about. India, one of the biggest higher education system in the world, the second populous country in the world, but not really talked about in higher education circles. I know for a fact that this is the first time probably that we are doing a webinar on IC3 platform on talking about India. Given this responsibility to talk about India as an education destination, I thought I should cater this presentation to 2 set of people. One are my counselors who are based in India and who are looking for more information on how admission processes are done, and also for my colleagues and counselors from around the world, especially the developing world, who may be interested in knowing more about India. So we will be, over the next 10 minutes, the moment this slide moves to the next slide, I will be talking about first, why India. One of the key reasons is the quality of the education. We have a very huge network of universities and colleges and diploma colleges and degree colleges, and some of them are really good. Some of them are okay, but you count the number of colleges and universities that are really good, that comes up to a huge number. The fee part, the fee is pretty substantially manageable, lower than any other destination from around the world. The cost of living is low. English is the medium of instruction here. It's the lingua franca here in India. Globally recognized. We are recognized globally. You will see it on the next slide. The global people that have studied in India, welcoming environment, and definitely easy and convenient visa process. That is a plus. So as I said, there are about, so there are 3 types of universities in India. One is central university, one is a private university, and state universities. Deemed to be universities can be either of the central, state, or private universities, but to be short, central universities and state universities are funded by Government of India and the respective state governments. These are like public institutions. And private university is the space where a lot of action is happening these days, and a lot of very exciting projects are coming up in India, which are attracting interest from people from around the world. As I said, globally recognized. So these are some who have already studied in India, like you have Her Excellency Aung San Suu Kyi from Myanmar, who studied in Delhi University. His Excellency Hamid Karzai, the ex-president of Afghanistan, who studied in Himachal Pradesh University. You have His Excellency the King of Bhutan, who studied in National Defense College. Global CEOs like Satya Nadella, who studied at Sundar Pichai from IIT Kharagpur, Ajay Banga, who studied at Delhi University. So you have a whole set of people, achievers, high achievers from around the world, who have passed through Indian institutions, done their colleges in India, and then gone abroad. So just to give you an idea, the number of foreign students currently in India, and this is as per the report of our local government body, there were about 47,000 students who came to India for their education. Almost all of them, I think majority of them, were coming from developing nations. Like Nepal is the number one place from where the students originate. Nepal, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan. So I think for developing world and South Asia, India is a but natural destination for higher education. And if you see, out of this 47,000 students, 73% were coming in undergraduate programs. So these 2 graphs give you that. Our education system, we have, I think we have a pretty similar model to the UK education system. We have 12 years of school education, followed by university or polytechnic, you can either do a 3-year degree program or a 5-year degree program, depending on the course. If it's a BCom program, it's a 3-year generally. If it's an architecture program, so there are differences there. But generally, that's the idea. This slide can give you that idea of our structure of our higher education system, right from our preschool to PhD level. So the government of India has started a very interesting project. The new government under Prime Minister Modi has started a campaign called Study in India. Now www.studyindia.gov.in has become like a one-stop website for all the international students who may want to study in India. And the good thing about that website is that there are about 2,000 scholarships that will be given out by Government of India in the upcoming year, which is the 2020. And this Study in India program has top 150 public and private institutions associated with it. So if you make a profile, if your student makes a profile on Study in India website, he or she automatically will be in the database of about 150 plus institutions. So this scholarship test, which will be conducted in the year 2020, is an online test. I think this test will cover, this is what we have been told by the government, that this test will cover verbal, quantitative, and logical reasoning sections with difficulty level of a grade 11 and 12th. And the interesting part is that this test will be conducted in about 20 international destinations. So this slide will give you the scope of this exam. It will be conducted in Nepal. It will be conducted in Africa, South Asia. I can see, a lot of Middle East. You have an exam happening in Yemen. So I will talk about this as an opportunity for my kids from, high achieving and low income backgrounds also. If you are getting scholarships with an exam, I will definitely recommend students to be, and counselors, my colleagues, who should be encouraging their students in developing world to be signing up for this exam. As far as I know, there is no cost also associated with exam. That is what we have been told. But I will definitely, double check on the website studyindia.gov.in, and please make note of this exam. Now, coming to my counselors in India, as Vicki said that it's a large system in US and it depends. I think India also is quite similar. We have a lot of exams. We are an exam and competitive heavy country. Like for engineering, we have joint entrance exam for engineering, which about 1 million students write. Then we have NEET for medical national eligibility entrance test exam for medical examinations. Then we have NCHM for hotel management. Then we have different tests for law. So CLAT for law is the exam that is conducted by NLUs. LSAT is conducted by Pearson, which is very well recognized. Like my university, OP Jindal Global University, has LSAT as an admission criteria. Then we have test for architecture, which is again conducted by a Government of India body. Another important development that I want to update my counselors on is that the College Board India has made some great progress in India. I think they have the first office outside of US anywhere in the world in India, and they are giving a lot of scholarships. They have a good association of universities, Indian universities, that have tied up with College Board and are offering good opportunities for students to take in. So I will definitely recommend students and counselors and colleagues to take note of the College Board India website and register yourself there. If you are thinking of writing the SAT exams, there are also scholarships that they are giving on writing the SAT exam. So definitely College Board India website is an important tool for the upcoming year. So please take note. Okay, so I talked about the private institutions in India that are upcoming. Over the last I would say 10 years or so that I have been working in the higher education space here in India, I have seen a lot of change, a lot of new developments and positive developments. There have been a lot of corporate backing and investment in higher education sector. So you have universities like Ahmedabad University, you have like my own OP Jindal Global University, Ashoka University, Kriya University that have been set up the vision of having a world-class university in India. Being a large country, sometimes we get stuck with old, what has been carrying on in our system carries on for ages. But these universities like Shiv Nadar, Bennett, Aziz Premji, Flame have come up as a breath of fresh air. They have they are philanthropic institutions, I will say, set up on the lines of US higher education institutions, where a lot of good people, well-intentioned people get together and set up an institution for, next 100 years and 200 years. Truly great institutions. They are interdisciplinary in their approach, again, like US institutions, with the emphasis on critical thinking, global standards, globally well connected. Our students go all over the world, very focused on the admission processes. So I will suggest these new age private institutions in India are another set of universities that you should look out for. Some of them I have mentioned here on this slide. These new age institutions, as I said in my couple of slides previously, that we are an exam-centric country. There are so many good people who want to get into colleges, but sometimes there are not many seats in those good colleges. So if you don't get 99.6, the cutoff is 99.6 and the student gets 99.5, he or she gets left out. Those are the kind of stories that come out of India, and I'm sure many of you would have heard those stories. But these private institutions are doing something different. They are giving a kid an opportunity to have, recognize his potential and express himself or herself through a letter of recommendation or an interview, and talk about how do they think, how do they learn, what drives them, how do we deal with others. So some of those silent aspects of personality which were lost earlier in our university admission processes, these new age private universities are doing that. And I really appreciate these universities because they are the hope for our future. So I think this is about it. I've covered my 10 minutes. I'm just about over my 10 minutes. But I will now like to take questions, and all of us here would like to take questions from the people out there, my colleagues. I'll just check the...
I see that there was one that says exam only for international students, or can Indian citizens apply for the scholarship that you mentioned?
Yeah, this is an exam only for international students, not Indian nationals. Only international students are eligible for this exam.
Okay. And then I see that there was one for me in terms of Europe, in terms of kind of average cost of education. Generally, if you are looking at public institutions, they are obviously government funded. So when it's students coming from outside, they are generally minimal cost. I would say between about 500 to about 2,500 euros per year. When you're looking at some of these kind of up and coming private institutions that are offering different programs, I think it's about 7 to about 20,000 euros per year. And these do tend to offer scholarships. They may be a couple of thousands to very much kind of reduce costs of the students. And then any kind of institutions that's much higher in cost and things like that, it certainly kind of brings it down in terms of scholarship financial aid, so more following an American style model. The quick thing that I always just kind of point out is that many times it is a question of a visa for the country, that with certain countries they are looking for an amount in a bank account to show that you can sustain yourself for your living expenses. So just to use Switzerland as an example, generally I think it's around 21,000 euros that they like to see for the public system, and you actually don't make a payment to the university until you have arrived, enrolled, and have gotten your paperwork. So it's a little bit of a different way of looking at the system.
Any other question? I don't think we have any other question in the chat box. We still have about 5 minutes. Any last minute thoughts that Sagar or Vicki you would like to share? Anything that you would like to share about your presentation? You want to chip in here?
Yeah, Ankur, I think there's a question there for Petra.
Yeah, Petra, can you?
Yes, I see that it says, I find it difficult to understand what subject criteria in high school do UT colleges have for admissions. Can you share your insight on the subject? Yes. So when you are looking at a lot of public universities throughout Europe, they're basically trying to evaluate a foreign system to be equivalent to that country's system. So in many times, you know, you kind of hear the stories that you need to have 4 years of a language, you know, 3 years of a science, 3 years of a math, right? This is an equation to that particular country's system. And hence they want to make sure that a student that's coming from a system outside of that particular country has kind of matched that criteria. You have a lot of high schools still in kind of national systems that either kind of follow a science math track or follow more of a humanities and language track. And that sometimes certainly dictates in terms of what subjects the students can apply for at university. So when you are seeing a lot of the websites from those public universities around Europe, it will just be very specific that we need to see a biology class, a chemistry class, we will need to see these particular areas, we would need to see math at a certain level and things like that. So this is where they're trying to figure out these equivalencies, very much to kind of match the preparation of a student coming from that country. That's then usually obviously kind of looked at in terms of the entry examinations that students are taking. For some countries, it is very specific to the subject. So if they're applying for an international relations course or an economics course, then they will be sitting an entry examination that's very relevant to that area. It wouldn't necessarily kind of test their general knowledge in terms of that. So I hope that helps clarify certain things, and I will certainly be happy to help after this webinar as well.
There is one more question about sports quota admissions for international education. So if any of you would like to take this up, sports quota admission for international education.
So I can, Ankur, I can just mention, Shweta, that for now, I think it's the academic requirements that are paramount for the Australian universities, but this was recommended during the last IC3 conference, and I think a lot of universities back in Australia now started thinking about it, talking about it. As on date, I think it is the academic requirements which are paramount for students to apply to the GO8s.
Vicki, you want to share something about US on sports quota admissions?
Sports quota admissions. In the United States, there are, we do definitely recruit international students to come and play on our sports teams. I wouldn't say that there are any sort of quotas in terms of the international students that are coming in. Again, same as with Australia, the students are going to have to meet the admission requirements for the university. There are some scholarship opportunities at some Division I schools that are available that may make it an attractive option for some international students. But as far as, I'm a little confused what we're talking about when we're saying a quota, because we don't have a quota system for international students for sports admission.
Perfect. I think that's what she was talking about, having a separate admission process for international students sports. I think for me in OP Jindal, if I am going to talk about and other Indian institutions, I think we do take into account the achievements of students in sports, and we do encourage students to have those kind of programs. But there are certain programs that will encourage that, like my liberal arts program will have a special mention that this kid has done something exceptional in sports, and we will take notice. But there is no quota as such, again, in our Indian institutions as well. But there are some state-run institutions, public institutions like Delhi University has a sports quota where you can get into admissions, but not many from side. Yeah. Okay, we are just
for Europe and things like that. I mean, exactly, works very differently because that's not how our kind of systems are structured. But many universities work with local sports teams. So if any students are interested in things like that, they can either put them in touch with recruiters, but they would be representing the city instead of the institution. But there are certainly some other programs there. And then Ankur, I was just going to say, I know somebody wrote in there that exactly, obviously lots of specifics to different countries in Europe, and maybe we can bring something like this to IC3 and ask our representatives from different European countries to maybe put together a bit of a handbook that you guys can certainly reference in terms of the different European countries, and just to have better guides, better resources, links and information that you can certainly use on the counseling side in terms of better understanding the European perspective.
Perfect. So I think there is a idea of a handbook to have there. Yeah. Perfect. I can't see any other question. So anybody would like to, we are just bang on time. We have reached 9:30. So if we don't get any other question, can we say goodbye to all of the presenters and people who chipped in? I would like to say thank you to all who took time out for this first webinar for IC3 in 2020. Thank you to my co-presenters. All of you were fabulous. Great job, guys. I loved presenting with all of you. So I guess it's goodbye from me.
Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.